Welcome to Grapes and Debates, a podcast where we'll uncork some incredible wine and debate varietals of issues within the restaurant industry, one glass at a time. And now, your hosts and owners of SoNapa Grille, Adam Barringer, Chris Botting, and Joe Bates.
Hey, put that
he'll be in
closer to Harley there.
There's a lot going on next week. So,
well, Harley, we just took a few minutes, talked about the wine dinner that we had in New Smyrna, and we then kind of talked about our relationship with the wines. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and
sure,
tell us about Paul Hobbs, because we really didn't cover that as well as you could possibly cover it.
No problem. A little bit about me. Well, as you can see from the gray hair, I've been in this business for a long time.
Oh, come on.
The first 20 plus years was actually in the restaurant and hotel business.
Okay.
So that's why you have the gray hair.
That was the gray hair. That's where 20 some years later I decided to, stop that and go do what I love to do, which is wine.
Right.
But I spent 20 plus years between working with the Four Seasons, Wolf and Puck, and my mentor in the business, Jean-Marie Lacroix. So with everything from super fine dining to people telling me that I couldn't do volume, so I went to work for Wolf and Puck, and a slow night for us was 400 people. And and then eventually moving around, I ended up moving to Florida 2007. So I came to Florida right when the crash happened, and went from a restaurant that was doing quite well to not doing so well, and learning Florida seasonality the hard way. I opened a few couple of grills, and then I kind of got out of the business completely. I was in Chicago at one point running consulting for another company, and decided to leave the business and come back and get into the wine.
Wow.
Not knowing anything from the wholesale side. Right. But starting out, didn't want to work for the big guys because I was like, they're going to put me in somewhere that doesn't make sense. I want to learn the ins and outs. So I started working for a smaller company in South Florida when I moved to Broward and developed the entire region for them. Their original portfolio, I didn't know any of the wines, which I told them that's a bit of a problem after I've been doing this for 23 years, running very long wine lists, and we're able to switch. At the time, I was actually managing the French portfolio, so my background is more Francophile, Burgundy, Bordeaux, grower Champagne,
Wow.
And, so I did that successfully for them for a while, developed a lot of key accounts. Because you're doing that kind of niche portfolio, you get to know all the key accounts in the entire state of Florida. So for me, from Fontainebleau to Burns, I had to get to know everybody. Then an opportunity in the end of 2014 came about. Paul was looking for somebody. I was introduced by two people who I have worked with that were currently at the time working for Paul, and both of them somehow, recommended me for the position. And I came to work with Paul managing the import side of the portfolio. His question was to me is like, can you actually educate people about Malbec and everything else? And I said, to be honest, I don't even drink Malbec. But I guarantee one thing.
But I'll learn.
Getting appointments with your name on is a lot easier than getting appointments with a lot of the Burgundy because it's very niche. And a year later, we incorporated the entire portfolio. And the rest is history. 10 years later, I'm still here. Different parts of the southeast region. I got to ask to actually help out with the cruise in the Caribbean in 2019. Our business wasn't there. Took over that business. I have been successful in that as well. We have grown that business significantly now. And and Paul for me has always been, for the very beginning, is the real story. What I did not know about California, I knew about growers. I knew about true winemakers, true growers like the Burgundy. And Paul is a living and breathing representation of that. For him, the wines are made in the farm first. So that's where he spends most of his time. And that's where he's focused. He was a pioneer when he came to that, starting in the 90s in California, where winemakers were never going to the vineyards. Paul was like, basically, in the early days of Napa in California, winemakers live in the winery and vineyard managers live in the vineyard. They met once a year when they were growing the fruit, but winemakers were not involved with growing the fruit. So Paul kind of broke that ground because that was his background growing up as a farmer, and then connecting his idea, his experiences going to Burgundy and seeing the grower names over there is what gave him the idea to first put grower's name with Larry Hyde and Richard Deneville in the label, with another caveat that he didn't have the money to pay top dollar for the fruit. So in his mind, he was, if I put their name on it, they're going to give me the best fruit because they're going to take pride. So that was kind of the original idea. As you can see, over the years, our labels have evolved basically from a Burgundian style, which is complicated in the market. Because you go from, for example, the Coombsville that we're drinking right now, that says Coombsville, to Tokalon, $400 difference in price, and it's basically a line on the label.
Right.
So that has created a bit of a, we're learning that over the years, and with the next vintage, on the 21 vintage of the Cabernets, 22 vintages of all the Pinots and Chards, we're changing that completely. So it took us about 5 or 6 years because everything in our company, Paul has to sign off on it. He has to approve it. These labels have been the same since the 90s when we launched. Finding the paper that he actually was produced in Germany was a challenge. So it's a specific type of paper.
Wow.
So but Paul is that kind of, when we're talking about Paul, we're always talking, when I do presentations, it's precision farming and precision winemaking. But that precision goes into everything that we do.
So one of the things that we really like, again, you met our friend Jack Holcomb. He is the reason that we have Paul Hobbs on our menu.
Thank you, Jack.
Paul Hobbs. Now, Tony brought in the crossbar. I've never had it before, and Tony said, "You got to try this." Tried the crossbar Pinot Noir, and at the price point, we were able to bring it in, pour it by the glass, and it's our most expensive by the glass Pinot Noir. I think it's very smart to have Cross Barn by Paul Hobbs as opposed to Paul Hobbs and a lower.
No, I understand.
So I think that's very smart. We were just talking about that, a secondary label.
And that was, to be honest, as with most things in Paul's life, there was an accident, was serendipity.
Okay.
Cross Barn came as an accident. Paul was making Stagecoach Cabernet in 2000. And back in those days, like what most people don't know, we didn't have a facility to make wine that was our own until 2003. Okay. So from 91 to 2003, some of the work that Paul was doing consulting was borrowing agreements. I consult for you, I get to use your facilities to make wine. Okay. I consult for you, you give me some fruit, and so on. So he was making Cabernet from Stagecoach. At that time, we're using layered facilities in Yountville. And he arrived over there. This is back in the days that still, I think today is maybe a few wineries, very few. But those days, there's still quite a few wineries that used to have the tanks that were outside and not covered. Okay. So that was the only tank left for him when he arrived over there. He put all his fruit on it, started fermentation. It was a little rainy, it was a little odd year. So he decided to cover with a tarp and sit next to it. Back in those days, Paul was doing just about everything, from farming, getting involved in the entire thing, bottling, and going out and selling. And that happened to rain, he happened to sleep, and was a little bit of water that got in there. So it got diluted. In Paul's mind, he immediately was like, I can't put my name on this as Stagecoach. Most people would have done it, no problem. What does he do? He decided, okay, let me declassify, let me use this, put another label. Didn't even feel like putting as a Paul Hobbs label, so he wanted to put something completely different, and that's how Cross Barn was born.
No way.
Because he was using grower fruit, and he grew up in a barn that was named Cross Barn back in his farm, that's what the name came about. But then he was putting single vineyard wines into a label, selling for half of the price of the Paul Hobbs. Yeah. And he's surprised that was success. Sure. We're selling out. Right. So then he's like, wow, this could be an opportunity. Because working with growers is always a learning process. They have to learn how Paul likes to work. We don't simply buy fruit from anyone. Paul goes in, select the rows and the blocks that he wants to work with, then tell them how he wants that to be managed during the growing season, and he personally goes in and making sure that it's done. He has this whole thing that is inspect what you expect. So he was like, you know what, this could be an opportunity that I can bring these growers in, not knowing much about how I operate. I can educate them over time, 3 to 5 years down the road. I can elevate their fruit so I can actually use for Paul Hobbs.
Sure.
Because back then we didn't have any property. So that's how Cross Barn came about.
Okay.
This was 2007. The project has grown, but mind you, Cross Barn, half of the price, is still made by people with Paul Hobbs mentality.
Wow.
Now, is there a separate vineyard for Cross Barn? I mean,
Now it is.
okay, so you have a separate tasting facility?
We don't have a tasting
Okay.
facility yet.
Okay.
What we do have is we have a separate vineyard, we have a separate winemaker.
Okay.
And we actually, in 2007, we took over apple processing facility in the Sonoma Co-op and converted that into a winery.
Okay.
So that's where Paul Hobbs Cross Barn is made.
Because this is Sonoma. and
This
you-
is Sonoma,
Russian
and the
River,
focus
Napa.
became, from the very beginning, when he decided 2007 is when we actually add the Chardonnay. In the beginning, it was only Cabernet, and then it's like, okay, it's time to make a label out of this, and develop the Chardonnay and the Pinot, sourcing from the Sonoma coast. So a little different, a little closer to the ocean, brighter fruit, and then using Russian River for and the Paul Hobbs Pinot Noir, and the Chardonnay. And so 2007, and then as time goes by, well, he started making acquisitions. 2003, 2006, 1998 was our first property. Where the winery is, that property was not bought until 1998 and was completely virgin. It has to develop from the beginning. 16 acres, 13 and a half plants of Pinot Noir. And after doing that, we start purchasing some properties. So Ross Station Chardonnay came on board. Edward James, where Paul actually resides, came on board. And then in 2015, we had a major challenge, or 2014, he could not find enough quality fruit for even the Cross Barn for the Chardonnay. So we're kicking. We're selling quite a few cases. The wine is growing. At the time it was 1350. And we had we went from 14,000 cases, and he dropped the production to 8,000 cases. So we went to market saying, stop presenting to anybody else. We read the reports. We only have enough wine to actually make sure that everybody that's been supporting us has wine. So stop supporting, raise the price a little bit. And then he went on and purchased a new property called Finney Ranch. And that property is dedicated to the Chard and the Pinot. So fast forward to now, over the period of 6 years, we acquired 280 acres in California.
Okay, so the Steve Jobs of wine.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
How did that come about?
That
What
came
does that
in
mean?
2013 from the Forbes magazine, labeling him on one interview because they were interviewing him and seeing all the innovation that he has made. Paul was instrumental in developing the first Malbec in Argentina when nobody, including the Argentinians, couldn't care less about Malbec.
Yeah.
He also has been through a partner, a gentleman that I think still resides in Naples, had a property in Hungary. He went to make wines in Hungary. We used to have a couple wines made over there. He has been instrumental in developing the wines of Cahors with a partner that we now produce Crocus, which is Malbec from Cahors. And this is a fourth generation family
Gotcha.
that came to him to improve the wines of Cahors. Instead of going to Michel Roland or anybody over there, went to Paul. And so with his influence around the world, Argentina, what he has done, multiple properties that he has.
Thank you for listening. But before we wrap up today's episode of Grapes and Debates, here's a quick reminder. This Member Monday at SoNapa Grille, enjoy a complimentary slice of our brand new New York style cheesecake with the purchase of any meal. And here's a bonus. Mention the code word Harley and we'll pour you a glass of Paul Hobbs Cross Barn Pinot Noir on us. Hope to see you tonight.